With what has transpired recently, I figure, hey, let's rehash the Pastor with No Answers discussion. 1 year ago, actually, we had these conversations, and I haven't even gone back to listen to these. So it'll be interesting to see if I've changed with how I would process these things here a year later. On this pro-life, pro-choice, Roe versus Wade reversal, I think it was about a year and a half, we talked to some wonderful women that for sure made me think deep and hard, second guessing a lot of the things that I just assumed. As always, ultra pro-lifer, and even as I have become more progressive in my faith, I still consider myself pro-life. I don't know if I attach that to political stuff. We are going to get the Pastor with No Answers co-host women together here in the next week or so, including my wife Priscilla. I'll be joining them as well. And I'm looking forward to personally sharing. I mean, I'll be... Whoa, it's thundering right now where I'm recording. But I'm looking forward to sharing 2 questions that I've been presented with that I just can't shake when it comes to what I've always found to be a pretty black and white issue. 2 questions that I've been presented with that I just can't just keep tracking along how I've always been. It's really made me second guess a lot to discuss. But for right now, here's some conversations we've already had. Such an honor to have these women come on this show, and I know you'll enjoy it. If you haven't heard them, if you have already heard, I can tell you it's worth the second listen. We'll see you next week. Peace.
Yeah, no, I listened to one of your podcasts, so that was really helpful to hear your style.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. Which one was it?
The repentance one about bad Christian.
Oh, gotcha. Well, that's a
doozy.
Yeah.
Oh, well. So I got the...
There you go. Yep. Cool. All right. Let me, and it's Wesley. I know you got to get some crazy attempts. Wesley.
We just say it Wesley.
Wesley. That's so much easier.
Who knows how it's really supposed to be said. But.
It sounds as if you would be, and I know you don't want to be locked into a label, but so you have free reign to push back and destroy anything I say. But it would sound like you would be in the pro-life camp, except you are also very pro-woman, and where a lot of evangelical Christians or just Christians, Catholics, whatever, unintentionally, their conversation seems to just stop at, don't do that to the unborn. And then there's no talk about there's a legit situation going on every single time, because we're always talking one woman and one situation that's got a background in history and all of that. But I'm sure I oversimplified, but tell us a little bit about Pro-Grace.
So that's a great question. And I will not so much push back as just comment on that. Pro-life and pro-choice are political.
And real quick, just so you know, Ellen calls me names on this show. So you can push back.
Pushback is the lightest thing you should be doing with Joey.
So it's not pushing back against you, because there are only 2 categories. And so what happens for all of us is we're scanning. We're mentally and emotionally and theologically scanning to see which of the 2 categories is this and does it align with me. And that's the problem with it. It's what I call a false binary. And Jesus addresses false binaries a lot in the Gospels, and we can talk about that. But for this one, pro-life and pro-choice were created by people. They're political constructs. I'm not saying there aren't Christian Republicans and Christian Democrats. There are, but these are primarily political terms around should abortion be legal or not. We as a church have not taken the time or put forth the effort to have a kingdom construct, if you will, of how we think and talk about it. And so that's part of the problem is Christians feel like we have to go in one of those camps or the other. I actually don't. And pro-grace doesn't. And it's interesting that you think we're pro-life. So we should talk about what made you guys think that. Because there are other
don't say
people.
you guys.
Okay,
don't say you guys.
Joey,
Just Joey.
Joey, because there would be other people who would read our website, and this has happened to us. They're like, oh, you're on a slippery slope to pro-choice because you talk about the woman so much.
Wow.
So the issue with that language, and I liken it to the examples in Scripture with Jesus, that you look at John 8. The Pharisees came to trap him, and so they said, should we stone this woman or not? False binary, because they were misusing the law. Sorry, there was a lot of stuff going on with that. Jesus gives a third kingdom answer. They come to him saying, should we pay taxes to Caesar or not? That was a no-win question. He was going to alienate half his audience. He gives a third kingdom answer that just silences everybody. This is what my passion is calling on Christians to do. Could we just for a hot second, quit identifying with those labels? We can identify with them politically, but as believers, could we come together, whatever our political affiliation, and say, we need a kingdom answer to this, right? Politics is never going to fully solve it. What's God's third kingdom answer to abortion and unintended pregnancy? And that's why I don't use either of those words. I just say I'm pro-grace. That's how I talk about it.
That's so, I can't wait to get into this because I think this is the one, we'll just call it an issue, the one issue where tons of pro-lifers would say, pro-life is the kingdom mindset. There's no way of getting around this. And I don't. Ellen, what were your thoughts going into this conversation before we really get into the conversation?
Well, like what's happened before, sometimes Joey has me on to with people and he's like, oh, you guys are gonna go, you guys are gonna spar.
I didn't think that.
But then what happens is like, oh no, we believe the same exact thing. So I'm really excited to hear from you and encouraged. And it's one of those things where like, I am I believe in a consistent life ethic. And so, but I'm just a mom, a stay-at-home mom. So I'm excited to hear what you do and how you take what I am assuming is maybe a similar ethic to mine and what you're doing with your organization.
Why did you just say you're just a stay-at-home mom?
I was going to say the same thing.
The hell is that?
I was going to say the same thing. No.
Because I'm in the throes of it, guys. I don't like it.
It's hard. I didn't like it either, Ellen. It was really hard.
Some people love, we've talked about this before too, Joey. Some people love that identity. Right. It's like, I finally made it. I own a home and I have a yard and my children are so beautiful. And I'm over here just like, let me the fuck out of here. Yep. I miss working and helping and challenges that are not just like puke in the car seat. I want challenges like actually solving world problems.
Is that why you're almost always a yes when I ask you, hey, you want to be on the podcast? Yes.
Yes.
It's like an outlet.
Are we going to talk to another adult? Yes.
Right.
Well, and you're actually putting a finger, we may not have time to discuss it today, but that mommy myth that there's a certain way of being a mom, it's actually one of the drivers of abortion. I mean, I'm glad you brought this up because this is a complex issue with a lot of cultural narratives. And that is one of them, that's the only way to do mom. And so if it doesn't happen at that time in that way, there's shame coming from the outside, there's fear coming from the inside. Like, it's important to have your voice because this is all wrapped up in this issue.
Yeah. And I've said before, if I wasn't so pro-life, I'd be working right now at the job that I love. But
so let me ask you this. Let's say there is, and I'm going to assume that there's an evangelical Christian and you wear that label proudly and you're listening right now. Here's what he or she would want to ask Angie. Why are you not just pro-life? Why do you have to water that down? Why do you have to be neutral? Why are you not pro-life, Angie?
So it's not watered down and it's not neutral. What I'm going to do is I'm not going to tell you guys how I vote. So I see pro-life and pro-choice as how I vote, right? This is the problem. It is how they vote. And when we say it, that's how people stereotype us. The problem is when we're using a how we vote language to talk about our Christian ethics in this, that gets us into trouble because we've just shut down the conversation and shut down half the people. So what I say is I keep how I vote on this private, and I want to have a conversation with you, evangelical Christian, Catholic. I hope people who aren't believers are listening in, because church, we got to do some internal work on the kingdom, how we actually view this from an ethical Jesus standpoint. And what I'm saying is Jesus is our savior. He's our leader. He's our hero. Let's hold him up, how he interacted with people, how he interacted with divisive issues of his day, how he dealt with religious people. And let's put our response to abortion next to that. And that's what I'm passionate about having a discussion about, because from that sense, and I'll just start with our theology. From that sense, you've got pro-life saying we primarily value the child, right, in the legislation. And pro-choice says we primarily value the woman. We see her needs, the legislation. When you look at God's design of pregnancy, and this is the first theological tenet of pro-grace, God didn't have to do it this way, but he intertwined a woman and a child for 9 months in such a way that anything you do to one impacts the other. And Ellen, you're fresh off this, you know this. He's made it impossible for us to say, we're just going to help one of these people and bypass the other. So the very divide of the pro-life, pro-choice political discourse violates God's design of pregnancy and puts us into this place where we feel like we have to pit the needs of one against the other, right? Or elevate the needs of one against the other. But when you look at it through the lens of God intertwining the two and his equal value for both of them, you can see right away we need a third way to think and talk about this so that we can meet the needs of both. Could we ask God for a way that we could meet the needs of both? And I believe through research and our experience, we've found some of those ways that Christians can actually come together, regardless of where they stand politically, and live out God's equal value for the woman and the child. And I think that's his answer to abortion. I think that's when the church will rise up and will be the safe place for people impacted by this. And we can see much greater change in our community through the church being the church than we ever will through a political decision. So that's why I've dedicated, my life, my calling to changing the church, not the politics.
What have you found to be the most liberal or anti-church kind of thing that you're practicing? The thing that you get maybe the most pushback from the super conservatives? So
I don't think we're practicing anything anti-church. I think what we're doing is really stripping away tradition, ideology, mental models we've adopted without really knowing why. And we're going back to the gospel. And so all of our training programs, we're a training and equipping organization. So we have these workshops, and I can tell you guys more about that, but they're Jesus stories. We're just interacting with Jesus stories. And so when we interact with those, that's when we have him open up these ideas for how we can help the woman and the child. So interestingly, from a theological standpoint, we don't have Christians either more progressive or conservative arguing with the theology, because it's the one I just shared, his design of pregnancy.
You can't really disagree with.
No, you can't. And the second one, the second theological tenet is that God's path for transformation for us individually and corporately as a culture is always grace. And, Brene Brown's research has been so brilliant because I feel like she backs up the gospel, which is God accepts us, gives us a new identity, calls us his child, does all this stuff before we've ever done one good thing, right? And it's that knowing of who we are that releases us from shame and allows us to be more like him. But in this issue, we've turned it upside down, and we so want to, and I have examples of this, we so want to have women say, I was wrong, I had sex outside of marriage. I was like, we want the change in behavior first before we extend grace. And so we just go back to the scripture, and you never see that. Jesus is always grace first. So those two theological premises are very orthodox biblically, and we start building from there.
So this may be because I have a hard time in the gray. Like I'm very black and white. I could understand, though, some pushback of someone saying, yeah, but when it comes to the actual terminating of a fetus, if you If you are okay with that, then you are pro-choice. If you're not, then you're anti-woman and taking her choice away. Like I can understand the whole, hey, we want to support women, we want to support this child, but when it comes to that, the crux of it, can you terminate that child? One side says if you say no, then you are mistreating women. The other side says if you say yes, then you're killing. Like,
yeah.
Does that drive you crazy when I just go right back to that?
Not at all, because I'll tell you this. That's because the question that you're coming from is, should it be legal or not? So that is one question. It's a valid question. And I love that we live in America and we need to exercise our right to vote on that. That is one piece of the puzzle. Should it be legal or not? The problem is that is actually not the driver. Nobody has an abortion just because it's legal. No little girl says, I can't wait to grow up and exercise my right to choose. It just doesn't happen that way. The abortion is there and it's so fought over because the unintended pregnancy and the shame and the scarcity and the fear that surrounds that is so overwhelming. And we actually have a cultural narrative and a church narrative that continues to enforce that to women, that your life as you know it is over.
You mean almost like the church and the patriarchy caused the problem? What?
So it's a silly question to say, should it be legal or not, when we know, I shouldn't say silly. That's silly for that to be our only question when we stop and say, wait a second, why do women have abortions? Okay, 60% of women who have abortions are already moms. It's a wrong stereotype to think these are women who don't know that it's a child or don't want children. And the vast majority of the other women who have abortions want to be moms someday. But it's this crushing narrative of what's happening in our culture. And so I feel like the enemy has blinded us as Christians when we keep just asking, should it be legal? And we don't ask, why do women have this? And how could we as the church surround and support? The enemy has kept us blind. Because if we would dive in and say, why do women have abortions and how could we support them? That's what's going to actually make the difference. And my premise is most women don't want to have an abortion. It feels like their only option because of all these multiple factors. That's where I think the church should be camping out, right there.
So when you train, I assume that you're going into churches and talking to people that are wanting, are willing to learn. Are you training with resources as well, or just sort of trying to get them into a mindset of, as we preach grace, we're learning to love these women and then meeting them where they're at? Or is there a component which is like, what do we do though if they decide to have an abortion?
It's a great question. We launched ProGrace. I actually came out of a pregnancy organization. Some people call them pregnancy centers. I led one of those in Chicago for 10 years. And then about 5 years ago, my colleague and I launched ProGrace out of that to train Christians. And so we've been working on the model because we have this vision that when Christians all over the world embrace a grace-centered response and create these communities where women and children can thrive, that's when God will turn the abortion issue around, right? And he'll be seen more for who he is. But the question has always been, how are we going to do that? So the actual way we do that is we do work a lot through these pregnancy organizations because they are the historic parachurch organization of churches who are passionate about this. And in their communities, they're surrounded by local churches. So our training has been going through them, and we're actually in the fall launching our first online course that anyone could access, which I'm really excited about. But the reason we're building it on the ground through these organizations is we want this to stick. We don't just want this to be a concept, a flash in the pan, a book. We wanted a program behind it for exactly the reason, Ellen. So in an ideal situation, church folk would be able to go through this online course and they'd be connected with a pregnancy organization that has adopted this ProGrace approach and is living this out so that when women are pregnant, the church and the organization are working together, right? And they're building this community that the pregnancy organization is a specialist in it, but the church is the long-term care, right? So you can see the need for everybody working together to create these communities where women feel safe coming to the church. They can have support, emotional and practical support. And then they can just be part of the church like you and I are part of the church. Right? It's not like, what I don't like is categorizing this as worse than other issues that we all struggle with and talking about, I'm making air quotes now, those women, when as the church, we are struggling, all of us, to live out God's ideal for us. And so shouldn't we be a place that welcomes everyone? So yeah, the first part of the training really is thinking differently, Ellen. I mean, and I think that's why this is different. The church wants to rush to, let's have a program for pregnant women. But if we don't think differently about this first, our judgments are going to come out all over the place.
Oh, I can see how that would go so wrongly.
It goes so wrong, and we can't be safe. And so we tell church people, relax. You don't have to do anything. Just let's immerse ourselves with Jesus stories. Let's think differently about this. Let's look at the research of why women have abortions. Let's put ourselves in her shoes. Let's us have a transformational moment with the Holy Spirit first.
Let's get rid of shaming people.
Right. Let's get rid of shaming ourselves. It's shaming each other.
Basic.
It is. It's just the gospel, basically. But yes.
Yeah.
And then the second piece is talking differently, because the language shuts down. And that's why women don't go to their church when they're pregnant. They're hearing this language. They're making assumptions. So talking differently is the second part. And then, yes, there is a program where churches can support pregnant women, but we really give them the freedom to work on them ourselves first, if that makes sense, before launching into that.
Yeah. Well, that's what is going to make it stick.
So a woman reaches out to you.
Oh, Joey loves hypotheticals.
Fine, let's do it.
And basically, let's say doesn't really look much into it, but she's like, gosh, I do find myself, I think I'm a Christian. I do believe in grace. I don't know what to do. And she reaches out and says, hey, I really need some emotional support. I really need a community to walk me through this. I'm getting an abortion, and I feel conflicted, but I know this is the right thing to do. Can I meet with someone? How do you interact with that person?
First of all, that would be amazing and such a breakthrough if that would actually happen in a church.
Yeah.
Because you know that doesn't happen, right?
Right.
Like, the statistics are 4 out of 10 women who have abortions are churchgoers. Only 7% of them do what you just described. They don't tell anybody. So first of all, we would have greatly succeeded in the Pro-Grace mission if we get to this point where a woman does come to a church. Secondly, what we train the pregnancy organizations in, because they're the ones who really sit with women, but also for a church response, is we use a question asking model. It's counseling based. It's how any of us would want to be received and talked to when we're in struggle. So we'd say, okay, let's talk about it. How are you feeling? Give her a chance. There is nowhere she can go and unpack this without other people's agenda, right? So that's what we hear over and over, because her family's going to have an agenda. The father is going to have an agenda. You know, there's all these people. And so one woman put it so well after going through this program. She said, everyone else was asking me, what are you going to do? But they asked me, what do you need? That is really the model of Pro-Grace, because we think that's what Jesus would do. You know how in scripture, he always just brings the tone down and he sits and he asks a brilliant question, right? He sees the person. That's at the heart of the Pro-Grace model, because at the end of the day, I can't speak into her experience. He can, right? She's feeling this way because of a multitude of factors, and it's different for every woman. And it's not just this one thing, right? There's a lot of different things going on why she feels like she has to have an abortion. Maybe she's in college. Maybe she's in ministry and is afraid the church is going to kick her out. Maybe the father is saying you have to have an abortion or I'm not going to be with you. I just talked to a woman yesterday. It was her husband who said she had to have an abortion. Like, we don't know these stories because we're not safe. People don't come to us and talk. And a woman and a man need a place to sit and process this huge emotional weight and all these things going on. And what happens a lot of times is we can say, well, that's interesting. You know, we're really sorry about that. We do have this support over here. Like, we can help people and direct them to the support they need once the silence is broken. If a person still decides to have an abortion, is that what you're asking me? Is this what you want to get to?
Sure.
We're there. We're there. Right. Here's the thing. We choose to go against God's ideal for our life all the time. Yeah. All of us do. for a multitude of reasons. In this case, we know from research it's about survival. This is a huge weight, a huge decision. It's about survival. And so we walk with women, however they're walking through that. And I would say that one of the first groups of people in a church, if you want to call them groups of people, after the pro-grace message goes out, it's usually people who've had abortions who speak up and say, now that you're talking about it with grace, I can actually talk about this. And man, I'd love for our church to change because I really wish I would have had this support. I don't know what decision I would have made when I had this, if I'd had this support, but I know my experience would have been so much different and I would have felt more options open up to me. So if that makes any sense, that's getting to the true need, but we're taking our hands off the control of, you can't let her have an abortion. It's like, explain how we're not going to do that. And talking about like, how do we step in and force? And that's been part of the problem in pro-life. Some of the stuff we've done to quote unquote prevent abortion, women take that as very manipulative, not seeing them, not caring about them. And we have to take that stuff to God and ask him what to do with that.
I wonder if part of the reason Planned Parenthood has been so successful, regardless of what happens in their clinics, is because they have taken a position of no shame. And yeah, what else are you handing out? I'll take that.
And the thing is, this is my passion. Jesus set the church up to be the greatest bearer of grace on the planet. Like, his grace is so monumental because it deals with the truth of the fact that none of us can live up to God's standard. Like, that's the human condition. Joey, you said it in that podcast that I listened to. We're made in the image of God. We're beautiful. We're capable of amazing things. And we're capable of some really dark things, all of us. Like, none of us can live up. And when we come together under his grace and this identity of the forgiven and the free and the loved, what if we were the most loving and accepting place on the planet for anybody struggling with anything? That's how he set us up. But because he also then gives the answer for freedom. We know it doesn't feel great to stay stuck in that stuff. We want freedom, but it's only through grace and the acceptance and the community that we can find the freedom.
It's really telling, actually, that Planned Parenthood gives more grace to sinners than in the church.
And that's on us.
And we
that is on us, girl.
Oh my gosh. Do you ever get from I really don't know what sorts of conversations you engage in. Do you take hits from both sides, all that sort of thing? Like, do you ever hear from someone who's pro-choice that's just like, oh, give me a break, you're pro-life. Like, everything you just said, you're pro-life. What are you talking about? You're not any different. Do you ever get that?
We do. We're working on, we've gotten people saying you're pro-life light, right? So,
hey, that's better.
Well, it's interesting. You didn't want to be called strongly pro-life, Ellen. That's interesting.
Well, the reason I wasn't sure where you stood quite yet. And so when most people hear super pro-life, they don't understand that it's like, no, I'm pro-life, like anti-war, anti-death penalty, all of that.
Right. But I would, And we've got podcasts, you can put them in the show notes, with our friend Laura, who is pro-choice and has been on this journey with us for years. She actually tried to shut down the pregnancy center in Chicago that we worked at before we worked there. Yeah, we didn't know this. We met her, we went on this journey. And she'll talk about why she works with us. And as she said, it's because you put the woman in the center. See, at the end of the day, the pro-choice position is, are you listening to the woman? Do you put the woman at the center? Do you trust that she knows how to make a choice for herself and her family? And so we just take that. I personally take that a step further and say, are we building a society that supports her, that gives her what she needs? Like, I think it's not a full realism of feminism to just give the option to abortion. We have to give a better society, right? That offers childcare and support in the church and help for her. So,
which is so, to me, it's so ironic that, going back to being politically conservative and pro-life, if that for so many is the voting issue, if it's ironic to me that that's their one issue, like to get rid of abortion, but there's a whole plan set out to get rid of it, to abolish abortion. Everybody would like to live in a world where there's no need for it. Need, some people would use quotes with need, and they have the ability to make an infrastructure to support these women who believe they need an abortion, and they actually have the power to make it obsolete. But they focused on the symptom.
Right. The symptom, we haven't asked the right questions. We're not addressing the root issues. So we just keep addressing the symptom. You said it beautifully. And if a fraction of the money and time and resources and brain power that is spent on the political battle could go to creating a better infrastructure inside the church, outside the church, in our communities for women to have their children at the quote unquote wrong time, you know, as women experience it, what a difference could we make, right? Wouldn't that be what we're really working for as a society that values all people?
I'm also so interested in the Black and brown women aspect of this, and the fact that so many white Christian women, like, they take up the biggest chunk of the pie chart as far as abortions go. And yet we see more Black and brown women having kids in poverty. They're trying to have children, right, and they can't successfully do that. So
right. Well,
I guess that's a different
topic. No, it is. And again, where this relates is that we have distilled this down to one woman making one choice at one point in time.
Yeah.
And to your speaking about the Black and brown community, and for white women as well, there is cultural narrative, there are issues, there is abuse, there is objectification, there are messages sent to women. It's not just this one decision one time. This is coming out of a whole system. Now, it looks differently depending on socioeconomic, but the pressure on women to have an abortion or not have a life is very strong. And actually, in minority communities, the abortion percentage is actually higher. The white women have more abortions because we're a bigger part of the population. Yeah. But abortion is still a very high percentage because of this narrative.
Right.
So, Angie, I don't know how, I think it's super relevant in this conversation and with what you have set out to do, but if it's not, then we'll just kind of treat it as a different topic. But especially with how Jesus centered you guys are and striving to be, what's your feelings on passing out condoms in school?
Again, that's a behavior.
Wait, are you asking that, Joey, because you're wondering if they're promoting sex in that way? Promoting sex by handing out condoms?
I think there's definitely now a whole discussion on purity culture and have Christians taken it too far and all of that. I would assume that Angie would fall more in line in marriage is where sex is had. So when you pair that with serving people as Jesus would, I think about, some people would say if you pass out condoms, then you're a sin advocate. Whereas is it that, or are you
because you're promoting like
or
sex?
Are you right, or are you loving them, saying, "Hey, I know you're going to do this, and I don't want you to harm yourself further"?
Hey, listen, at my clinic, we had a whole brochure, and there was a whole section on don't use sandwich bags as condoms. So if people are going to be using condoms, I think everybody should be celebrating, because there is a huge community of people that think that Gladlock is a good solution.
Oh, well, and from the pro-choice criticism of pro-life would be, if you want to see fewer abortions, you need to see fewer unintended pregnancies. So why are you against contraception for people who aren't married, right? That's kind of the way the logic goes. Again, I really approach all this from an emotional standpoint, not a behavior, because we know that our emotion drives our behavior. To your point, Ellen, if there are people who truly don't know how to use contraception, obviously education is the way to go. What we were seeing when we were in practice with this is there's a lot of people that know about it and know it needs to be used, but there's emotional blockages to sometimes using it, right? So part of the conversation our counselors would have with women, if they came in thinking they were pregnant and they weren't, is say you don't want to be pregnant and you're engaged, in sexual activity, talk to us about birth control. And they would say, well, he doesn't want to use a condom, so I didn't. Well, that's a whole nother issue, right? That's a whole nother place. And so again, I just don't think the action of passing out condoms is either a great solution or this horrible evil. Like, again, I hate to say the middle, but I see both sides. I see why you'd want to do it. I see why. But I think we have to get to the bottom of this, which is we all go outside of God's plan to meet our own needs. So can we just look at our own needs? Like, what is the need that's not being met that has people thinking it has to be met in sex outside of marriage? For those of us who believe this is God's intention, then we got to really dig down because the sex drive is very strong. I did an interview with Julie Slattery. I love her. If you've never had her on, you might really love to have her on, where she talks about why she believes God gave us our sexuality and why it's so important. And like the church is just afraid to dive in. So that's a whole bigger issue. And when you want to talk about hypocrisy, I just asked the church, so let's look at our own kids and our own singles in our churches, right? Before we worry about passing out condoms in schools, how are we talking to the people in our own churches who are having sex outside of marriage, who are addicted to pornography? Like, I think the church is good at focusing on this one issue that they perceive to be outside of ourselves. And instead of opening up and saying, if we really believe in God's plan for sexuality, let's dive all in and let's get ourselves in line with that first before we have some hope to offer everybody else. Does that make sense?
Yep. Angie, recently I was talking to Joey on another conversation, and he was at a church. He accidentally went into the women's bathroom, and he was in the stall, and he had there's sometimes like the little bat.
I was at the sink.
Oh, you were at the sink. Okay. Yep. Well, they had the little basket of like tampons and panty liners and stuff, and he thought they were treats.
Well, I imagine I was so
they were like candies.
I was so convinced. I mean, think about it. I'm in the men's restroom for all I know because I didn't use the rest. I went in there just to wash my hand. I am in the men's restroom and I see a basket of stuff. I'm like, oh wow, they went all out with treats and everything.
My point is that condoms should be issued like tampons and pads, but what I gave Joey a hard time was the fact that, like, even if they were giving you free treats, you're in the bathroom. Gross.
I know.
Why are you like, popping a mint in the bathroom?
We don't do food in the bathroom.
I'm so excited. I'm so excited for what you're doing because, like I said, I'm just in here like folding tiny clothes, thinking about, all the good that I could do with my passion. But I'm glad that there are people like you, like doing the work on the ground. And maybe I'll come join you when I get a minute to myself.
I love that. And even just you guys just thinking and talking differently, this is how it's going to spread. We just don't have a voice. Those of us who say, neither of these political expressions really fully represent how I think Jesus would interact. There's a lot of us who feel that ickiness, and we just got to start talking about it.
So prograce.org, we'll have that in the show notes. How can people help? Like when Ellen's done with this early child rearing stage and doesn't have to be married to laundry and cleaning up spit up, how can she get involved?
Yeah, well, everybody can sign up for our e-news because what we do in that is we do give practical tips for how to live this out, like ways to talk pro grace about current events. So you'll get tools in that e-news. And then in October, when we launch this online course, we'd love for people to take it and then promote it at their church. That's how we're going to get the word out, is having people go through this experience and begin talking about it. I mean, that's really
I'm so excited.
Yeah.
I'm excited because my church is a very small, like post Mars Hill recovery church. And I think that this could be really, really helpful because the hearts are all there. We just maybe don't have the right language.
Yep. And it'd be great to go through together. That's our hope and dream. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you, Angie.
Thank you guys for having this conversation.
Oh, Angie, I think you are a queen.